It's Brian with the Fanboy Factor. Today I'm speaking with Dr. Miriam Eve Mora. She is the director of academic and public programs over at the Center for Jewish History. Uh, Thank you for joining me today,
It's
Miriam.
my pleasure.
So the reason for this interview is you are having this event called, I guess, Juicy. It's a Jewish comic experience. If you wouldn't mind kind of just giving like an overview to our viewers.
Sure. It started with just the convention, which is the Juice Convention,
Right.
Jewish Comics Experience. And the idea behind that is to kind of celebrate the Jewish history in comics and examine Jewish representation in comics and talk about how elements of both the industry and the content are both reflective of Jewish history
Right.
and representative of contemporary Jewish life.
Now
So,
I
oh, go on.
no, after you, please.
I was going to say there was a Jewish Comic-Con in 2016 and 2018 in Brooklyn, which was a smaller production.
Right.
But I've partnered with Fabrice Sapolsky, who created those events, to make this. It's not a sequel so much as a recreation. It's
Okay.
focused less on Jewish creators and more on Jewish stories.
That makes sense. Yeah, I'm Jewish myself. I have an 11-year-old son, and telling him about all the Jewish characters, he gets his mind blown, and it actually has given him a little bit more pride in his heritage. But how did you get involved in this? Are you a comic fan yourself?
I am, yeah, yeah. My background, I mean, I'm a lifelong comics fan. I was my first career was in the visual arts, but in photography, and I was not a reader. And then when I ran out of Neil Gaiman comics, I started reading his novels, started reading more and more, and then eventually actually went for the PhD in history. So now I'm a historian, and I do focus on American cultural history, Jewish immigration and ethnicity, and gender, but I haven't written much about comics. It's just my passion. So when the kind of thought crossed my mind, and in discussions here about what kind of larger program we programming we could do at the center that would bring in new audiences and identify an aspect of Jewish history that's been
Right.
kind of underrepresented or
Definitely. Yeah.
underexamined. This was my first thought was, oh, we've got to do Jewish comics.
Yeah.
Primarily because I think when you say Jewish comics, there are a couple kind of typical responses, and one of
Right.
them is, oh, you mean like in Cavalier and Clay, right? Like in
Yeah.
the Michael Chabon book. So it's all about the origins of the industry, which is a part of it. Um, and then the other thing that people tend to talk about is Mouse and
Right.
Magneto and the kind of, you know, consistent Holocaust survivor imagery that we see
Right.
in comics. And
Yeah.
what I really want to focus on is what a I mean, it's a really important part of Jewish representation in comics. But
Right.
I think it was kind of this pivotal moment where people were using Holocaust representation to bring Jews onto the page more overtly, as opposed to,
Right.
like, is Superman Jewish?
Yeah.
These kind of coded Jewish characters. And that was like a gateway. And now we're at this point where you don't have to talk about the Holocaust to have Jewish identity.
Right.
And
Fully agree.
there's much more diversity on the page in Jewish identity. There are, Jewish Latin characters and Jewish, Jewish American stories from all kinds of ethnicities,
Right.
and Mizrahi stories, Sephardi stories. So, we're really seeing this, and I thought it was something worth celebrating.
I felt that Will Eisner was probably one of the first to kind of bring that American Jewish culture into visual arts with his tenement stories, and then going forward. So I understand where you're coming from. It's not just the focusing on just the Holocaust. There's a lot more. Even personally, when I read it, it's just like I started to understand what's kind of like just to be my heritage a little better, especially with coming to America and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. So as it's interesting, excuse me, because I had never as an immigration historian, I had never planned on really focusing a lot on comics. It was just my pastime, but there's
Right.
so much tie-in. It was, early in the 20th century, it was such a Jewish industry, but it was such a Jewish immigrant industry.
Right.
And so much of the story of what we think of as, mainstream comics was created by the children of immigrants,
Right.
which is, and that kind of generational divide, at least according to most immigration historians, right? The immigrants come and then their children try to acculturate as much as possible. So
Right.
there was a famous quote by an immigration historian named John Hyam who said, "What the son wishes to forget, the grandson wishes to remember." Meaning that the children of immigrants, they don't learn their parents' language. They want to be as American as they can because their parents have these accents, but then their children start to re-embrace the culture. And I think that we see a lot of that in the comics industry
Right.
as like a kind of immigrant child where, the original Jewish superheroes were completely coded. They
Hmm.
were all Clark Kent. They were
Yep.
all, hiding their identities and had these secret origins. And it was clear to a lot of readers who were Jewish, who were in the know, what of these characters might be Jewish. And then characters started coming out more overtly Jewish,
Right.
characters like Kitty Pryde, who were introduced as Jewish, but we're all very kind of secular and Ashkenazi and just stated as Jewish, but not really embracing much Jewish story beyond that.
Right.
Not that that is not a Jewish identity, it is, but but now I feel like the grandson is wishing to remember, and all of these, creators are putting Jewish stories drawn from Jewish mythology and Jewish folklore and
Hmm.
Jewish texts and Jewish history, but also this contemporary Jewish experiences in Israel and experiences in Iran and, all over. So it's and American experiences that are more diverse.
Right.
African American Jews and Mexican American Jews, and just a tremendous amount of diversity, which is
It's
wonderful to see.
I mean, it's funny you say Kitty Pryde. I mean, even though we did know she was Jewish, she wore, the star, but we really didn't see too much of with her with the heritage. I think it wasn't until an issue of The Thing where first off we found out that Ben Grimm was Jewish and he's doing the mourner's Kaddish, and it was really groundbreaking. A couple years back, he just finally got married and he had a Jewish ceremony for that. And it's a little representation, but it's nice to see. And then you have like character like Moon Knight, where you find out later on his father was a rabbi,
Right.
things like that. You actually get to see more of it. And I feel as we're going on, we're starting to get better representation than we did before.
It's coming in. I feel like there was a moment, and a lot of it I see in X-Men, right?
Yep.
In Claremont X-Men and in Bendis X-Men, where, Jewish writers, I think, whether consciously or unconsciously, I mean, obviously they consciously choose whether or not they're making characters Jewish, but whether consciously or unconsciously, they recognize that maybe the just saying they're Jewish isn't enough. And so we see
Right.
this moment where characters are retcon Jewish way more
Right.
often. They're like, okay, we need more Jewish characters, but we don't need that many more characters. So,
Right.
they retcon characters, which I think, some of them were done really well, some of them less so, but the most common way to do it was to say, oh, someone discovered there was a survivor in their past.
Right.
So that's another place where the Holocaust really pulled in, was in the retconning of major, like Magneto being retcon
Yeah.
Jewish,
Yeah.
because he was Roma, in different storylines, and I think again after, and so there's lots of changes throughout those
Right.
characters' history. But I think you're right. Wearing the Star of David, it is a perfectly, like, Kitty Pryde was Jewish. We knew she was Jewish, and that is quintessentially American Judaism in a lot
Right.
of in a lot of ways, especially a lot of ways that people criticize, but also, you're visibly Jewish, but beyond that, there's, not that much publicly displayed.
Right.
Whereas, like you said, the Thing, who was kind of always Jack Kirby,
Right.
so I think a lot of people thought that the Thing was Jewish, but he was never Jewish until he was retcon Jewish later.
Right. Yeah.
With these kind of, just like Spider-Man in the Spider-Verse movie, in one of the universe's flashbacks, we see him step on the glass at his own wedding.
Yeah.
There's like another kind of hint at this Jewishness. Or you see, I mean, I think there's a Jewish object somewhere in Harley Quinn's home in the new
Yeah.
animated series, and whether it's a menorah mezuzah, I can't remember, but but we see these glimpses, but
Right.
much less, that, or these heavily overt Jewish stories
Yeah.
um, that are really targeting Jewish audiences, like The Rabbi's Cat, and um, I would say a lot of Jules Pfeiffer stories, and
Yep.
but what we're seeing now that I think is exciting is Jewish content in mainstream comics.
Definitely.
That's not the entire point, but that's
Yep.
just a part of life.
Yeah.
And
It's
that's real representation.
I mean, look at when they rebooted Batwoman for the modern age. It's
Yes.
it was very in the series of 52 where she was introduced, it was very subtly, it was there, but you knew she was Jewish, but it wasn't like pushed down everyone's throat. It was just like it was very subtle thing on the way they did it, and it made sense. And you still, in some of her solo stories, you see her, being she is a proud Jewish LG, lesbian, and it's great to see representation like that.
Yeah,
And
and just this year, one of her minor retcons in her family history actually made Batman halakhically Jewish, I
yeah,
believe, which is um kind of stunning. And I don't know if it was intentional, but it's given the Jewish origins of the creators, I think it's a little exciting that
right.
there's a Jewish Batman, but also we can't retcon every character created by a Jew to be
Yeah.
Jewish. But Batman was never very, he was never convincingly Jewish, not like Spider-Man, who
Right.
seemed Jewish and spoke it, and threw out Yiddishisms and, had this kind of nebbishy vibe, you know. So it's interesting. But yeah, I always liked that character. The whole Batman family and the origins. I think it's a fun diversity.
Yeah, it really is. And like you said about, seeing how they're cousins, it's really interesting now with this, little
Yeah.
retcon, and just
Yeah. Oh, wait, where's the Jewishness?
yeah.
It's like playing Jewish geography, but with your favorite characters.
I mean, it's one of the characters they retconned was Green Lantern. His mother was Jewish, so now Hal Jordan. So for people
Right.
watching, yeah. So now he's technically Jewish himself. The Atom is Jewish on his father's side, but he's again, technically not a Jew because it's got to be your mother, and he's not exactly practicing. But there definitely is. I agree with you. It's more of a natural evolution that's going on, even though it is a retcon and it's not being. Some changes are shoved down people's throats, and while this is it's a very subtle thing. It's just like this is the way he is, and people are just like, okay,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there are new comics coming out, with new characters in these universes like Whistle,
yep,
um, who are coming out and are Jewish, but and it's not necessarily the defining feature, which I think is a great road for Jewish comics to be
right,
on. Um, yeah, it's very exciting. There's
yep,
a lot of good stuff going on in Jewish comics that's worth looking at.
yeah,
And especially I would say the representation of other kinds of Jews, um, meaning not meaning that the characters are getting less Ashkenormative and
right,
secular, which is, and I want to stress this, very important. That doesn't make those Jews any less Jewish, but we're looking at the products of a specific group, a specific group of creators in a specific time, and acculturation, and appearing American, um and honestly, like attaining whiteness, that was all very wrapped up in middle century Jewish American life.
right,
So it comes out in the comics, but now, excuse me, now I think we're, when characters are introduced as Jewish, that doesn't necessarily, the assumption doesn't have to be that that means that they were from the mass migration period from
Right.
Western Europe, that they're all Ashkenazi. Now some of these characters are of Spanish descent, or,
Yep.
Portuguese, Sephardi Jews, or Mizrahi Jews, and it's an interesting thing and much
Yeah.
more representative of the actual kind of global Jewish multiverse.
I mean, the only character that I can think of is just where the Judaism is just right out there, just because uh, she is Israel's superhero is Sabra, but that's what do you, that's she is the Israel, she is the superhero
Right.
of Israel. So, it's she's the only one where I think she was pretty much also technically the first, at least in Marvel Comics, she predated Kitty Pryde by a couple of years.
I think that's right. I can't be sure without looking it up.
Yeah, it's
But
she
yeah,
was introduced in the 70s where Kitty came in the 80s.
right. In the Dark Phoenix saga. Right.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I don't think I mean I know Sabra had some popularity, and there were other around that same time, like coming out of Israel, there were some Israeli superheroes like
Right.
Sabra Man,
Yep.
which was around the same time. I actually have one right here, I think, of Sabra Man. But there, yeah, from the
Yeah.
70s. So there were others, and then there was a wave of more recent, more overtly Jewish kind of superheroes. But if you really comb through the history, there were some more. There was a Canadian one named Northgard.
Yep. Familiar with him.
Flag was Jewish.
Yep.
Yeah, so there were some, but again, yeah, that kind of the diversity of being non-Ashka normative was rare. It wasn't non-existent, but it was rare.
So getting back to the Jewish comic experience that's
Yeah.
going to be happening, what can viewers expect to see?
So there are two different parts really. There's the actual convention,
Hmm.
which is happening on November 12th, and
Okay.
then there's the exhibit, which opens next week on the
All
9th.
right.
So which one should I answer first?
Let's go with the exhibit first, since it does open next week.
Sure. So the exhibit, because as I said, like, there's this there's like a global Jewish multiverse, right? So there's and comics are it's such a Jewish medium in so many ways
Yep.
that there's way too much to cover in one exhibit. So what we've done, um, for this first iteration, at least, is to create a two-part exhibit, well, three-part exhibit really. The first is we're calling the Museum of the Jewish Comics Experience, and that has 5 micro exhibits. So giant comic books standing in the room with small panel exhibits in them and some artifacts, provided by guest curated by all of our partner organizations in the Center for Jewish History. So that's the
Okay.
American Sephardi Federation, American Jewish Historical Society, Yeshiva University Museum, YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, and the Leo Beck Institute, New York. So each of them contribute one of these micro exhibits. So you can go through the museum and see these different kind of vignettes into the Jewish comics experience.
Okay.
So AJHS's exhibit is on the Jewish origins of the American comic book industry. YIVO's is on a brief history of Yiddish comics. The American Sephardi Federation did one on Sephardi life and identity and memory in comics. Um, uh, Yeshiva University Museum did one on children's illustrated publications at the moment of statehood declaration in Israel Palestine, and then the Leo Beck Institute did one on fighting fascism. And some of the exciting pieces that you can see in the collection, you mentioned Will Eisner. We have
Right.
a really wonderful original page illustration from Contract with God. We have all 5 issues of the Siegel and Schuster fanzine they did in high school with the first mention of Superman, which was 5 years before the actual creation of the
Wow.
character Superman. We have the second Captain America cover painting by Joe Simon, and a few, collectible comics. And so there's some very cool stuff to see in the exhibit. And then the second part is a Jewish comics reading library. So we've collected a whole bunch of comics and have some comfortable chairs, and you can sit and peruse and see just how kind of sprawling and inclusive this collection of comics is, because it goes
Right.
from superheroes to mouse to, strip comics and really you name it. Um, and then there is the laboratory. So in an adjoining gallery, we have this interactive laboratory, which really looks at the idea of the craft of comics and how identity is incorporated into that. So when you go in, visitors can create a character out of themselves with costume dress ups and props, and then pose in. We have photo booths with giant comic book covers. And it's all, we have lots of original art by Fabrice Sapolsky, like the poster you see behind me here is two of the characters. That's the Beta Israel Battler and the Golem Guardian, who are two members of the Justice League, who are all over the exhibit. And we have exercises on storyboarding and iconography and color, and you can draw on the walls, and it's very interactive and fun, and kind of talks about the different things that go into making comics.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
And then the comic convention is
So the convention is on November 12th. We are having a preview night, which is kind of the fancy schmancy event, where we'll have the Juicy Awards ceremony. So we've created these awards in Jewish comics. You can see the list of all the nominees on the website. It's very exciting, and it'll be kind of a little bit more glitzy of an event with past hors d'oeuvres and a bar and more schmoozing. And then the actual convention, which is a full day on Sunday, November 12th, is going to have 12 panel discussions, 3 workshops, organized Jewish comics trivia games, vendors, Artist Alley with over 30 creators. And we have some really big names. You can see them all on the website. I don't want to be too gauche and name drop, but a few more big ones are being added this week. And then all of the programs will be listed as well. So we have panels that cover a lot of what you and I have already talked about.
Mhm.
We have a panel called Cannons Are Meant to Blow Up, which is all about retconning. Have a panel called Jewish Superheroes Through the Ages. We have a panel on the Jewish origins of the comic industry. We have a panel on kind of breaking the mainstream and getting past Ashkenormativity in comics. So we've got all of these things covered, with all very creator driven, very creator centric. We have some scholars doing moderating, but for the most part, it's really focused on the people who make the work.
That's great. That's great. And for those of you who are watching, there will be links down below where you can click and go see for yourself. Uh, I mean, everything sounds great. I mean, I'm personally looking forward to it. It's, like I said in the beginning, it's telling my son about the heroes that are in both DC and Marvel that are Jewish, really gave him a sense of pride in his heritage. And I think we need more of that today. Like you said, not just Holocaust stories, but just everyday type of stuff that, that represents us Jews,
Are you bringing your son to the convention?
I think I am, yes.
Wonderful. I should mention there will be a clear path of programming that really targets younger people throughout the day. There's workshops for all ages. There's a panel called Kids Comics for Mini Mensches with, panelists who make kids comics and YA graphic novels, who will be doing kind of live comics creation with the audience. And so he's going to have a blast.
Yeah.
It'll be really fun.
Really looking forward to it. Miriam, thank you very much for speaking with me. Really appreciate that. And
Thank you for having me. It was a total pleasure.
and thank you again. Like I said, there'll be links below to further information on both events. Click on them and please attend. Thank you again, Miriam.
Thanks so much. Bye, Brian.